Centralization is going to come naturally from this by having informed community. We believe that those are all questions users should be able to answer easily and before they put any funds in the protocol. The challenge in all of that is transparency. You realize, usually too late, that you're entirely dependent on a centralized entity. You don't have to be immutable to be decentralized, to be stage 2. You just have to keep the user interest at heart.
Decentralization is a popular term in Web3 space. This is used in many contexts and it carries different meaning across the ecosystem. But have you ever thought about what decentralization really means in the context of DeFi protocols? Well, many projects call themselves decentralized, but is there a way to verify that? The answer is yes. And that's exactly what we are exploring in today's episode, transparency on decentralization in DeFi. Welcome back to Ecosystem Project Demo. This is episode 27 brought to you by ECH Institute. I'm your host Pooja Ranjan, joined by Akash and Emilien from our team. Today we are talking about something that could really build trust in DeFi and find out how decentralized a project actually is. Our guest is working on a tool called DeFi Scan that looks at this directly. We will talk about why it matters for users, what it means for builders, and how the whole ecosystem can be moved forward. Please welcome Emilien Duke. Welcome, Emilien.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. Generally speaking, we love to start the conversation with a little introduction. So if you could please share a little bit about yourself, how you joined the ecosystem.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. I'm Emilien. I joined the ecosystem about, I would say, 4 years ago, roughly, while in university. I like to mention I first heard about blockchains and ecosystem in a course about how blockchains were a tool for democracies to self-organize. And I think it's got me hooked on blockchain and DeFi that's when I started exploring it. And then slowly I got more involved. I've done some academic research during my studies. I've been involved with DeFi protocols as well. I've done many hackathons. And then about last year, I also joined the DeFi Scan to kind of help transparency in DeFi and user protection. So very happy to be here to present it.
So you have followed a great path, starting from hackathon, universities, and doing some research, getting into the space and started working on a tool. It's so inspiring. All right, I understand today we have got a presentation. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Yeah, of course. DeFi Scan. This is a project that's been rolled out by the DeFi Collective. The collective is actually turning 2 years old just today. And its goal is to promote true DeFi. So we're going to see what that actually means throughout the presentation. So we all know what DeFi is. It's a wide term. It can involve a lot of things. So decentralized exchanges, lending platforms, yield opportunities, liquid staking, restaking as well through, for example, EigenLayer. So it's all of that can be considered somewhat DeFi, and all of those we try to look into, to analyze, and to report about. The value in DeFi has been growing a lot, especially this year. You can see today it's roughly $250 billion worth of value in DeFi. But along with that, you also have a lot of value that's being stolen. DeFi Llama data, they report the total value hacked in protocols. It's about 15.5 billion over time. Interestingly, if you look at 2025, at the beginning of the year, we had a big one, the Bybit hack. I think it's interesting to mention, if you remember back then, what happened is the safe UI was disabled. Out of just security prevention, they wanted to check nothing was wrong when that happened. And for about 2 to 3 days, the safe UI is how people interact with their multisig and their funds. So for about 2 to 3 days, people had no idea how to touch the funds that went to their multisigs, even though this is something that's on-chain and that you can do without the UI, without any issue. Usually, people just didn't know how to. So that's how you realize, usually too late, that you're entirely dependent on a centralized entity. So the safe UI, the front end, was how most people access their multisig. And then when it was down, people didn't access their multisig for some time. So that was an interesting event and something to note. Another one, you don't have to read into all the details. Basically, a DeFi protocol with a vault in which people put their funds to get yield. But what turns out is a hacker got a hold of the admin key, and they were able to just drain the whole vault and all the funds. So you're told it is decentralized until too late you notice, oh, actually, there was an admin key that could drain all the funds, and people didn't know about it. So the challenge in all of that is transparency. So questions like who operates the protocol, how can the failure affect myself and my funds, what are the risks of tools being used by the protocol itself, how mature the technology is. We believe that those are all questions users should be able to answer easily and before they put any funds in the protocol. So that's our mission. We came up with a framework to categorize DeFi protocols and inform users to try and protect them. So we developed tools to do that. And we also support DeFi protocols early on. So when you have true DeFi protocols, we're going to see what that means. Then we try to support them from the start in their journey, because it's quite hard to, when something is purely decentralized, it's also harder to grow and harder to have momentum. So we try to support them this way as well. So how do we decide what's true DeFi? We have 5 criteria. The first one, almost the most important one, is upgradability. So can contracts be upgraded? When you upgrade a contract, everything can change. So you could reassign all the funds, the ownership, everything. And in addition to contract upgrades, we look, of course, if there are functions that can move the funds and that could basically use either the funds or the yield or anything that could affect users. Those are called permissions. And what's key with upgradability is the exit window. So it's okay to have some critical permissions, but how long do you have between when the permission is activated and when it takes effect? If a contract can be upgraded without delay, this is a huge vulnerability in a way, whereas what we ask for medium risk is 7 days delay, and for low risk, we ask for 30 days delay, so a whole month. This is one of the criteria that's the hardest for protocols to respect, because there's also a question of security. They want to have the access themselves to prevent attacks if they find any. So it's a hard balance to play with between protecting users from the team or from hackers getting a hold of admin keys, for example, and then protecting users from security bugs and attacks on the contracts themselves. So it's a hard balance. You also have autonomy. A lot of protocols use price feeds, oracles. If those can be manipulated, this can impact user funds. So we look at that to try and determine if it's a high-risk dependency, medium risk. Also depends if the dependency itself is centralized or decentralized. We also look accessibility. Front ends, I've mentioned the safe UI. That would be an accessibility issue. To be considered low risk, you need multiple independent front ends. If you can self-host, it's already a mitigation. You can be medium, but we try to really encourage protocols to not have a single website to access the protocol. And finally, chain. It's more debatable. Ethereum, Bitcoin, we consider low risk. And for L2s, for example, we use L2-bit scoring to determine the evolution of the chain and how decentralized it is. Those are our 5 criteria, the main one, and what we use to determine how mature a protocol is. So we put all those together and we get a scale. First step on the scale is actually not DeFi. So we had this case in the past. So if you have no docs or if it's not open source, critically the assets are held by a centralized entity. This happens in some protocols that claim to be DeFi, then we consider it not DeFi. But then we have 3 stages. 0 is full training wheels, but you meet basic requirements. So it's all on chain and it's still, at least at the contract level, decentralized. You can have operators, you may have upgrades, but the basis is here. It's a normal stage in the development of a protocol. And then we want to encourage them to evolve towards better decentralization. So stage one, critical permissions or upgrades, we want to protect them with a 7 days delay. Or then we also accept a security council, which is a multisig, but with very strong requirements. So it cannot be just the team. It has to be also external people. And the team itself cannot have a majority. It has to be 7 signers overall. So it's stronger requirements. And then stage two, it's the pinnacle of DeFi. Ideally, you have immutable contracts, or you can have 7 days delay on critical permissions. Typically, it would be on-chain governance, but that would be also okay if you have multi-sigs, as long as you have 30 days delay. So users really have time to decide whether they want to stay in the protocol when you decide on an upgrade. And we think that's key to true decentralization. That's the scoring detail, but we don't have to go into the details. I'm going to just show you the website. I think it would be interesting. Here, you have an overview of how much of DeFi we have reviewed. So actually, we reviewed $124 billion worth of TVL in protocols. So that 27 reviews, that's roughly half of DeFi. We have some big protocols also coming that would increase that number around the 60% at the moment. We can see on the right that, well, decentralization is the process. A lot of protocols are stage 0, which is critical, but they tend to evolve. Some tend to evolve towards stage 1, stage 2, and we definitely try to encourage that. Then you have the list of all the protocols. You get a quick idea of their score and why they score this way, so according to the criteria. And then you can dive into the details on the review page. So here you're going to see quick overview. For example, Morpho is stage 1, and you see why they're not stage 2 at the moment. And then you have a very, in plain English and easy language, we explain what is Morpho and why they score this way for each criteria, in a way that's understandable. For example, upgradability, Morpho markets are immutable, so that would be low risk, but the Morpho token in itself is upgradable and is in the control of a multisig. So the Morpho token is a reward token, it's yield, so that means for us it's medium risk, that the yield is at risk for users. So we explain this for each criteria in a way that's easy to understand. But if you want to go into the rabbit hole, and if you're technical, or if you even with Morpho, you can dive into the details of the contracts. Everything we had to analyze, we publish. So we explain all the contracts, all the functions, and this is very important documentation that's not necessarily available for protocols. I would go as far as to say that it might be more thorough than some documentations of protocols. So we explain everything. You have the multisigs, the contracts listed, and this is the documentation part. Every permission in the protocol is explained. So we explain what it does and how it could be used maliciously if it can, who owns the permission as well. So it's very crucial resources that we try to expose for every DeFi protocol out there. And I think that's roughly what DeFiScan is. I think we can dive into questions if you have any.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation and sharing stats on assets on chain and even the hacked value. Sometimes we overlook how sensitive this information is, how important it is to know the project is actually decentralized. And that actually helps build our trust into the financial system, and it is for our own protection. So people should learn about it. Thank you for talking about the selection criteria of your project, like how you define decentralization and talking about your framework. It was good.
Thank you.
I do have a few follow-up questions. I'm just trying to understand. This is pretty interesting that you have already defined everything, how you are coming up to a conclusion like this project is this much decentralized. So for an average DeFi user, why do you think these decentralization stage matters?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you have multiple factors to take into account, but as a user, it's quite hard to know actually how mature a protocol is. A lot of DeFi and decentralization is a selling point because you have this saying that code is low, in the sense that you put your money in DeFi and it's just going to do its thing. If it's lending, then the contract is going to handle it, right? But the truth is, in a DeFi protocol, This is not just you publish the code and that's it, it's done. Building a DeFi protocol is a process, and at the beginning, it's normal that a lot of protocols still have admins want to keep permissions. They want to be able to update if there are security issues. It has centralized entities. That's something that users don't necessarily know. They don't necessarily know how much permission people have on a protocol. So it's important to put it into the spotlight and inform them. It's okay to interact with newer protocols, but you should just be aware who actually you're trusting. It's just not code is low at this point.
Right. And as we can see right here on the screen that these are divided into different stages, but most of the projects listed here are under stage 0. So is the recommendation when projects are in stage 0 less likely to get engaged with, or they are more vulnerable than any other project? What is the general advice that you would like to send out via these stages?
Yeah, well, you highlight a very interesting point. We call kind of the stage 0 fallacy. In a lot of the older big DeFi protocols that are well established actually score stage 0 into the current conditions because they're so big, and there's always maybe some small elements that makes it stage 0 or some dependency. So of course you could interpret it as is you shouldn't interact with those, but you can also, there is of course a reputation to take into account for those bigger protocols. As I said, it's an indication, and then you have, as a user, you make the choice, who do you actually trust? But a lot of those are moving towards better decentralization in this sense. We are also changing the framework a little bit to take that better into account. So we're hoping to see also evolution soon in that regard.
Beautiful, like putting it into phase 0 fallacy. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting term. And I can understand why it is called as fallacy right over here. Perhaps it could be the wake-up point for even project to consider it, making it even more decentralized, right? They may have a lot of avenues to fill in the gap and make the project even more trustworthy. Very well.
Yeah.
My next question is, when project is evolving, can we track it via DeFi Scan? Say, for example, currently one project is in stage 0 and it is going to stage 1. For example, this is also possible that a project is presently in stage 1 and it come back to stage 0. Can user rely on DeFi Scan to track when a project improves or regress over time?
This is a great question. I'm glad you asked. At the moment, the reports that we publish are, in a sense, static. So that means at the time of publication, this reflects perfectly the state of the protocol, but then we have to manually make updates if the protocol changes. This is a lot of work. For example, protocol like Lido, Aave, those are huge protocols. If you look at the permission functions that we document, it's about like roughly 300 permissions that we have to look into. For now, it takes some time, of course, to count for updates. We do it as much as possible. In the future, in the coming weeks, we're hoping to have something dynamic so that we would automatically monitor those changes on chain. Roughly, majority of them could be all updated without our action. So that would be much more quicker update rate than now. But this is all coming soon, hopefully, but it's not the case at the moment.
That's pretty cool. It's important that it is in consideration, so we are going to have something there in place in due course of time.
Exactly.
All right. So my next question is with respect to the usage of this tool, DeFi Scan, to the protocol builders. How do you see DeFi protocol actually is using this framework? Is it like self-assessment, independent scoring, or both? Or do you have any plan to offer any kind of independent scoring and verification to these projects, if it is not there in place already?
Yeah, so if I reformulate, how do we actually do those reports, right? It's a mix of both. So protocols can self-assess and write their own report, but then of course we're gonna proofread it and we're gonna reproduce their results to make sure they're accurate. But most of the ones that are published at the moment, even the biggest ones, we've done in an independent manner. So we're not being funded by DeFi protocols as well to avoid conflict of interest. So we write those reports as an external independent actor. And we also have a community program where we encourage actually users to do the research and report the facts, and then we put it all together and proofread the content.
That is very good. That means the user or a project can self-assess themselves, and you are also there to hold hand and help them get to the state where they are actually standing.
Yeah,
That's pretty
exactly.
cool to know. Yeah. I'm also trying to get a little bit deeper into decentralization, the term. So, what is the biggest misconception developers have found about decentralization maturity? Like you have reviewed multiple projects, so you think that
Yeah,
some projects call themselves as more decentralized and matured, but they aren't actually.
that's a great question. You could see it in different ways, I think. So one misconception probably people have about decentralization is immutability. So an immutable protocol, you have to be immutable to be decentralized. It's two different paths in the sense that some protocols go with immutability, so they release one version like Uniswap, and those versions are immutable, so they're very decentralized. Whereas some goes like Aave go with something more iteration based. So the Aave governance is in charge and they're going to do updates quite often actually to improve the protocol. You can be decentralized and still have upgrades and still evolve and all of that. You just have this user protection in mind, which is not the case for every protocol in the sense that you need to allow users to react to your changes, to decide if they want to stay in the protocol when you make a change. So you don't have to be immutable to be decentralized, to be stage two. You just have to keep the user interest at heart.
So true. Yeah, I believe upgradability is a good factor. It will keep the protocol lively, so we should have that in place. So, of course, it depends on what is the most important criteria for an individual user or a project to like consider themselves as decentralized. Good that we have this tool.
Great.
We have some comparison ground set up there. Well, my next question is with respect to governance. Like you briefly touched about governance there. So, have any governance community or DAO shown interest in adopting your stages as a risk model to guide upgrades, audits, or funding decision? Or do you even think that the model that DeFi Scan is using right now could be used for governance and DAO in future?
Yeah, so this is definitely something we have in mind because decentralization is a process, as I've said. So that means when we give another good score or stage zero to a protocol, then we also want to think about how can they improve. So this is something we're developing as well. But every time we publish a report, we're going to give indications on what would be the next stage for the next step for them, the changes required to reach stage one or stage two. Usually, the smallest protocol make actually the changes. They're very happy to collaborate. Then the biggest one is harder because it's a big governance. You have to convince a lot of people. We try to inform mostly on the steps to take and how they could move towards more decentralization. So that's something we are try to work as much with the protocols as possible.
As much as there are steps provided as guidance for these projects to move forward from one stage to another stage, what do you think is the main motivation factor for these projects from move from stage 0 to stage 1 or 2? Is it like driven by reputation, security, compliance, user trust, or what do you think is the main motivation behind it?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because it touches a little bit of everything we do in the sense that actually moving from stage zero to stage one, I think a lot of protocols don't want to do that because of security concerns. So because they want to keep a hand on the protocol such that they can react to security bugs or security attacks, for example. And that's only possible if they have this centralized access to the protocol. So I think security is a concern actually that takes back, prevents evolution towards decentralization in some cases, whereas reputation is definitely a motivation. We talk about immutability. It's a big selling point. It's a good marketing to have an immutable protocol. And you've mentioned, I think, compliance. We don't see it at the moment, but we firmly believe, at least at DeFiScan, that decentralization will eventually be legally defined and you're going to have an actual decentralized protocol to fall into this regulation that's coming in some countries, especially in the US.
Right. Yeah, multiple factors may affect depending upon where the government of that country may affect some priorities of these selection criteria. Very well. My next question is with respect to limitation. I followed in the website, it was mentioned there are certain things that DeFi can do And there are certain things that DeFiScan do not do. Now, my question to you here is about future exploration. Do you see some kind of partnership or maybe getting in touch with projects like L2B for some kind of collaboration for risk assessment platforms or something like that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So we have collaborations on different sides that we're discussing. Yeah, as you mentioned, there are things that we don't do. So we don't make any security claims on protocols, but decentralization and security are two things that are related. So of course, we are also open to partnerships in that sense that would aggregate information from also audit firms and combine this towards something more, even more descriptive. That's all things we're considering. L2Bit we also collaborate with in a sense that you could say we're the L2Bit of DeFi. So we're trying to evolve in this sense. And we're gonna see how we can evolve in the coming months.
Right. I think a few months earlier, we had some conversation around public goods, and we were seeing multiple projects coming around, like how we can make sure that the project claiming themselves to be a public good is public good. And then we were working on defining the parameters of that, like it should be open source, it should be like, freely contributing people are responsible, accountable about things like that. And I'm seeing the almost similar thing here in the case of DeFi, which is really good to see that we are growing the ecosystem uniformly. Well,
Yeah.
my next question is about the future vision. Like, do you see DeFi Scan become a public standard, maybe for Wallet Explorer or analytical platforms that integrate to help users assess protocol maturity in real time? Maybe after a few years with collaboration or different forms that you guys may have in your horizon.
Yeah, well, definitely, that's definitely a goal. We want to be a standard in terms of assessing DeFi protocols and categorizing them. I think there's a lot of potential. You've mentioned both with wallets, also in terms of compliance, so defining legally what is decentralization. This is something that's going to happen eventually. So we're hoping to have a role in that for sure.
So a small follow-up that if you have to pick one environment, what it would be? Would it be Wallet Explorer or a governance dashboard? What would be your first pick to move forward?
But that's
Yeah. The lowest hanging fruit in your mind for this one.
yeah, no, I think the lowest hanging fruit is definitely explorers, wallet explorers or dashboards. It's all about visibility. And at the moment, that's what users see. So if you can have a place there, definitely a game changer.
Well, I think this is going to be an interesting question. For me, it is definitely one. And I hope the answer will help many of us to understand what a true decentralization mean. Which protocol do you think is currently closest to true decentralization, and why do you think so?
Well, I'm not sure I should name one protocol for sure, but if you look at the DeFiScan website, actually all stage 2 protocols, so that includes Uniswap, Liquidity, for example, and Pool Together as well. I think that those are a great example of what true DeFi in the sense that they score perfectly in all criteria. That means they are immutable, they have multiple front ends. There's not one access point. If they have dependencies, so if they use external protocols, then they do that with security measures. So it's really the good examples. You also have some stage 1 protocols like Aerodrome, Velodrome, and smaller ones, Pwn, for example. They're stage 1, but they're in very good way of getting stage 2 someday. And for small protocols, as I've said, it's a process. You cannot be stage 2 just on launch. So I think they all deserve a shout out in a sense. Because it's an evolution and they're all doing great with decentralization in mind.
That's a great answer. So we did not get one protocol, but we got a list of protocols. That's good. Good to know that. I would recommend people to go out and check out stage 2 projects there if you are considering getting engaged with DeFi protocol. So that's a pretty good set, tested, verified. And you have all the criteria right in front of you to verify that these projects can be trusted. Of course, there is risk. People should not forget about it.
Of course, yeah, there's always risk. There's a code risk as well that we don't assess, but it's a good starting point. And it's also, as I've said, plain English, easy to understand. So even if you don't know about the protocol, it's always a good starting point.
Indeed, it is. Well, I think DeFi Scan team is doing a great job out there to
Thank
help
you.
and provide people to know all these protocols in one place. It's really helpful. If you have an ask from the community, what it would be to help and support DeFi Scan, maybe your message or your call to action.
Well, use DeFi Scan in a sense. Be a true decentralized advocate. So that means inform yourself on what decentralization is and the decentralization of the protocols, because DeFi is community driven. So we need people to be aware of that. And decentralization is going to come naturally from this by having informed community. And I think this is the main point for change.
Very well said. I understand Ethereum, blockchain, Web3, and DeFi. These ecosystems are growing, and being informed will help us grow in a positive direction. So thank you so much, Emilien, for taking out time and talking about this project today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Dear listeners, if you are a builder, researcher, or everyday user, and you care about decentralization and transparency in DeFi, check out DeFi Scan. We'll drop a link in the description so you can explore more, give feedback, and get involved. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious, stay decentralized.